Live and direct, live and a date no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back. It's another episode of the Koala podcast. And in this episode, I'm talking to Ruth Fisher, co-founder of Can Dynamics. She's an economist, systems modeler, analyst, educator, and expert witness. So saith her LinkedIn. God, time goes so quickly, but must be about 4 or 5 weeks ago. She posted a very interesting post on cannabis patents. And you see quite a lot of information about trademarks, but you don't really see that much information about cannabis patents. So I got in touch, and she kindly has agreed to talk us through some of the research, what she found, and whether we found any really, really silly patents, which I'm always interested in. Ruth, thank you for agreeing to be on the Koala podcast. Firstly, in terms of just talk about a little bit about your background, what does Can Dynamics do?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I came to cannabis to help my brother figure out how to use cannabis to address his pain. So that's what brought me into the industry, and we started doing first understanding how it all works.
Well, that's a 5 lifetimes job, isn't it?
It is. I have a background in health and research. And so I'm particularly well suited to do research and figure things out. But I must admit, cannabis is very complex, and I'm still learn something new every day. And I don't pretend to be a know-it-all in cannabis. But
well, I think anybody who does is making a mistake, aren't they?
Yes, and it's incredible how fast we're learning new information. It's phenomenal. I'm reading about the literature and the research, and I'm saying to my brother, okay, well, try this, and he's getting some effects. And as he's figuring it out, he says, okay, he's an engineer, and he said, we need to help other people better move through this process of trying to help figure out which products work for them. So we decided to create a technology, an app, which is a journaling and tracking app to understand, okay, what are you using? How well is it working? How should you modify that in order to get better effects? And so Can Dynamics was founded to develop this technology. It ended up not working because in order to understand how well a product is working for you, you need to actually understand what's in the product. And that means you need access to the COA.
And they don't tell you that. And half the time you get the sense that they don't even know themselves what's in it.
Yeah. So that was very interesting. A whole other discussion on that. So we spent some time creating a prototype. We realized it wouldn't work. But in the meantime, my brother said, okay, well, we have so much information and it's organized in such an amazing way, we should really publish a book. So we published a book, our medical cannabis primer. And we also have an online course that kind of goes with that medical cannabis fundamentals. So Can Dynamics is really focused on the book and the course and just promoting cannabis education. Separately from that, as an economist, I'm also very interested in market dynamics and technology. I came from a world of technology and understanding which technologies are adopted and why, and how to optimize technology systems. And I'd spent a lot of time in patents. And so it was natural to me to ask, okay, well, what sort of patents are there in cannabis? And that's kind of how I got into that whole analysis on cannabis patents.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's a great move. Knowledge management is sorely lacking in cannabis. I'm trying to put together a research hub for law and social sciences because I've been waiting 10 years for somebody else to do it. I've given up waiting. So I think that's how it works in cannabis. You just have to do it yourself.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So, cannabis patents, and I presume when you're looking at the data, we're talking US only, or were you looking at um, sort of patents registered worldwide as well?
So for in case people don't understand how patents work, there are separate markets out there. You have the US patents, you have European, you have Chinese, Asian, whatnot. And if you want to compete, say in the US, if you want to sell products into the US and protect them, you need to have a patent registered in the US market. You can take that same innovation and register it, say in Europe or China or somewhere else if you want to compete in those markets. But I was interested mostly in the US market. So my focus was the US Patent and Trademark Office and patents issued in the United States. Now, anyone who wants to compete in the United States can get a patent there, which means there's plenty of international companies, say, Toyota makes, Japan makes cars in the US. And so if they want to protect their designs on Toyotas, they need to, Japan and Toyota will have patents in the US. So I was very interested in first of all, the US market to address your question, but also who in the US market, is it domestic American companies or is it foreign companies? And what types of domestic and foreign companies are those who hold the patents and what type of patents do they have?
So I suppose the first up, when did you see the pattern when people started thinking, I'm going to start registering cannabis related patents? So I presume before 2015, somebody, did a few bongs and a few bits of this and that, but really there wasn't, it was sort of fairly spotty. Am I about right with the dates? Would it be the sort of about 10 years ago, people started thinking seriously about registering patents?
You'd be surprised. The patents actually go back to the 70s or so.
Okay.
And the early, I had done an earlier analysis looking at all patents. The most recent analysis I did looked at patents that were still active, which means they only go back maybe 20, 30 years. But in my previous analysis, I was trying to look at the history and how what was being patented changed over time. And some of the earliest patents are trying to detect cannabis in people. So, have you for the drug testing. And that was some of the earliest stuff, and that's
Well,
constant.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's something they haven't even got to 1% to working out yet, have they?
Exactly, yes. And it's interesting. There's the detection is a big category, and there's two separate areas of detection, which I found very interesting. One is detecting cannabis in people. So this is for drug testing. And the big areas there are like blood and urine, which will, pee into a cup kind of thing, but also the breath stuff that they're trying to get a breathalyzer equivalent to
Yeah,
alcohol. And we know,
NIST are working on that at the moment with
yeah,
not much
yeah.
success.
The other big area, though, is detecting cannabis in samples. And this kind of goes with other drug testing technologies. If the DEA or the police come onto a scene, they want to know if drugs are present there. And so there's stuff like if you swab a surface or if you have some sort of substance, they want to detect it, whether or not there's cannabis or cocaine or anything else in it.
And were those developed mainly by US companies in?
It's all over. Everyone has, and I don't remember who held those patents specifically. But I was surprised by the diversity of the researchers just over time. It's been constant. And then the early patents, the other huge area going back, maybe not quite to the 70s, but certainly to the 90s, is research on the endocannabinoid system and ligands there and trying to figure out what types of compounds will work on the endocannabinoid system in order to, address different therapeutic applications.
And were those patents mainly applied for by large pharmaceuticals, or was it across the board, people, universities, everybody just giving it a go?
This was an area I was very interested in. It's so there's a sub point there is I was very interested in, so big pharma is, yes, they definitely have a presence, and there's some of the top presence. And the question I had is, are they looking at synthetics? So essentially manufactured compounds, or are they looking at phytocannabinoids, THC extracted from cannabis? And I had assumed that the vast majority of patents would be for synthetics because that's the world that pharmaceutical lives in.
Lives in,
And
yeah.
I assumed that it would be the traditional pharma companies. And I was really, really surprised at the number of patents for cannabinoids or THC, CBD, whatever, outweighed the number of patents for synthetics. And I was not surprised. I found it very interesting, but was not surprised that if you look at the synthetics, those are held by the traditional pharma companies, whereas the phytocannabinoid patents on I'm calling them all ligands. Those are primarily held by what I call cannabis pharmaceutical companies, meaning newer pharmaceutical companies where they're trying to go the FDA route, but they're focused only on cannabis products, whereas the traditional companies are doing cannabis among all the other things that they're doing. And so separate categories, the traditional pharma is doing synthetics, and the new emerging cannabis pharmaceutical companies are doing the phytocannabinoid research.
And I suppose there's a whole lot more research in there for looking back, say, 30 years, which of these companies survived, which were bought by other companies, and were they creating the patents specifically as a market play? I presume
Yeah.
I mean, you can. This is the interesting thing about them, the patents, because you can just keep digging, can't you? And
Yeah.
every question leads to another question rather than an answer, doesn't it?
Now, there's also a lot of patents held by research institutes and universities,
Well,
and
that was
those
my
are,
next question. Yeah.
yes, that's globally, but slightly more dominated in the US. And traditionally, the research institutes and the universities create patents that fill the pipelines of the pharmaceutical companies.
And did you find when the patents were being taken out specifically by the universities or departments within universities, or were they working? Did they illustrate that they were working with other organizations, or was it just so and so university was taking out the patent?
This is an area that I spent a lot of time in a former life, looking at that whole process there. And the way it works is in the US, the government funds a lot of research in the universities. And during the 80s, the government was looking at the universities and they saw this whole large repository of research that was stuck in the universities, not getting out into industry. And they wanted to incentivize this technology transfer out of the universities to actually commercialize it. So in the 80s, they passed an act called the Bayh-Dole Act. And what it says is if you've done research, even if it's federally funded, then the researcher is allowed to get a patent on that technology and earn money off of the patent as long as
Well,
they make
as an individual or as part of an organization?
it's both. What happens is you get the on a patent, it tells you who the inventor is, but the inventor often assigns that patent to a company. And if you're working in a company, the employer generally will require the inventor to sign over the rights of the patent to the company or research institution or whatever. So you get the inventor's name, and the inventor will definitely personally profit off of it, but so will the research institution. They get the patents, and then the research institution has an office of technology licensing and transfer. They will then license the patent, say, to a pharmaceutical company. And I worked on a case again, many lifetimes ago, on behalf of some university professors who had created an AIDS drug, and they were working in conjunction with the pharmaceutical company to commercialize the patent. And there was a breach of contract there, and that was the case I was working on. But that's generally how it works.
So did you in your research have time to work out out of every 100 patents, which ones actually ended up being products that work for people?
That's That's a very difficult thing to do. Generally speaking, a very, very, very small portion of patents ever make money. And you're talking on the order of maybe a couple of percent. And you can also have early stage research that just never goes anywhere because it's extremely difficult to, out of every, say, 100 inventions that they start to commercialize and get some traction on, out of 100 that they even get to that stage of being licensed, again, only a couple of percent will move through the process and actually end up as a drug. The failure rate is just
Well,
tremendous.
I suppose what I'm digging at is, if you look at the cannabis retail market, as I like to call it in the US, and we split it between medical and adult use, do we have any idea of what percentage of those products that these companies are producing are actually patented products, or are they all just,
Well,
cuttings of a cannabis plant shoved in a little jar with a brand and a trademark rather than being a patented product?
so you would see patented products in FDA approved drugs. And if you look in the US, there's two FDA approved drugs. There's Epidiolex, which is a
Yeah,
CBD,
which they spent a
and
lot of
there's
money on, isn't there? If I remember
yeah, and
rightly.
there's dronabinol or nabiximols, which are THC versions. There's Sativex, which is an THC CBD combination that's not patented. That's not FDA approved in the US. I think it's approved in Europe, but not in the
Yeah.
US. Um, you have Ramonabant. I don't know if you're familiar with
No,
that.
I'm not.
That is a drug that was FDA approved in Europe, and it was a weight loss drug, and it was tremendously successful. It's a CB1 antagonist. And what it did is it works essentially on your pleasure center, and it decreases your appetite. And it was a very successful weight loss drug. But it's working on your pleasure center and essentially decreasing the pleasure you get from food, but it also decreases your pleasure from other things. And it created suicide ideation and problems. So they withdrew it from the market. And as far as and again, it's a synthetic, but it was acting on the endocannabinoid system, and it was withdrawn from the market. And as far as I know, that's the only other ECS acting endocannabinoid system targeting drug that has been kind of near the market.
Yeah, because that's interesting because I mean, all those that you mentioned were sort of developed in the 2010s. So,
Yes.
and there's nothing has really happened since 2020, really. I mean, because I think all of those passed or didn't pass, but were talked about up to just prior to the pandemic. I've not heard of a cannabis related drug anywhere on the planet that has been FDA approved since.
I think that they did the low-hanging fruit. There are a large number of clinical trials in process. So there is stuff in the works, but I think it might maybe goes back to only a small percentage of trials are ever successful. And so maybe it's just kind of like any other drug. You have hundreds of different attempts before you actually find
And
something that works.
it's a 20-year process. So we're really looking at what, 2035, 2040
Yes.
before they
Yes.
start appearing on the market. We've talked about drugs, cannabis as a drug affecting people's health. What other sorts of patents were you seeing developed in terms of, say, industry development?
So let me just sneak in another point there, and that's within the area of the therapeutics. I was very interested in looking at, since I came into cannabis, I've been convinced that forms of delivery, ways of delivering it into the body would be a very big area. So I divided the patents into ones just saying we're creating a drug that acts on the endocannabinoid system to one specifying a particular mode of delivery. And there's a lot of, we're creating a formulation for oral delivery or an emulsion, and these are water soluble,
Are
meaning
those beverage companies involved
it's
in that?
not all beverage. It's important to have water soluble just for bioavailability. And so you want to get, the big problem is if you take, say, any sort of oral composition, first of all, it has to go through your whole digestive system. And so it can take an hour and a half for it to have, an effect. But also the bioavailability is really, really low. So for an average oral, you're getting maybe 5% of the contents that you're taking are actually absorbed into the body. And so when you have these emulsions, these technologies address both those issues. Is you can take now, say, a gummy, and you can start feeling it in, say, 10 minutes. And you're also getting a much higher bioavailability. I don't know what they are, but maybe something like 40% or something rather than the 5%. And just that water soluble means that it gives you a lot more leverage to put it into different forms of use. And they use emulsions in any sort of, the edibles, the tablets, the beverages, any other form.
Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a space race then at the moment.
Yes,
How
yes.
quickly
And
can we get things into human beings' bodies to get them as
yeah,
high as possible, as
yeah,
quickly as possible?
yeah, that's unfortunate, but
But
yes.
that seems to be the way that they're approaching it, rather than
Yeah,
a slightly more balanced approach, which would be
yeah.
preferable. But
And
it is the cannabis industry.
so you have oral forms. I was able to divide the delivery mechanisms into oral and non-oral, and the biggest oral areas are just general oral beverages, water soluble, and emulsions, which are all kind of sort of the same thing, but I just kept the nuance. Then you have non-oral as topicals, patches. Those are transdermals. Those
Yeah.
are the big areas in the non-oral. As far as some of the wacky patents, one of my favorites was a form of delivery, which was delivering THC in lobster.
I read that I remember reading that in the piece because you can't forget that because you immediately think of Salvador Dali.
Yes, that's actually I hadn't, but now that you mention it, yes, absolutely. Another very interesting delivery mode is in tattoo ink.
I sorry
And
for people listening, I just raised my eyebrows at that point.
there was delivery through straws.
Well,
Um,
within the actual body of the
it was
straw,
a coating, maybe a
yeah,
coating.
yeah.
There were wet wipes.
Was there an
An area,
argument for the lobster delivery methodology? And they just thought it up, basically.
yeah, I don't know.
It's just so you have to laugh, but then I mean, this is the good thing. It is cannabis. You are meant to laugh, and people don't laugh very much these days around cannabis. So that's why when I saw your piece, it did amuse me because at least people people are being having a bit of fun with
Yeah,
cannabis
yeah,
delivery. Um, were there patents, as I sort of alluded to before, to improve talking about growing cannabis,
yes.
producing
Cultivate,
cannabis?
yes. Cultivation was a very large area, and there's a large number of plants that have been patented. There's also patents, a large number in gene editing, so trying to
Yeah, that's
tweak
what
the
I'm
plant.
driving towards,
Yeah, in improving yields. And in the improving yields is kind of some of it's specific to cannabis, but others just generic to crops. And in the patents, they'll list like every crop out there, it will, increase yields. But there's also some specific to cannabis to say increase
Well, I
THC.
was about to
And
say, were there specific TA because
yes,
that's it's a bit like the fast delivery of the beverages. It's the same argument
yes,
is, how high
yes.
can we get our THC? 1,400% or whatever.
Yeah, and they're getting up there close
Yeah,
to
they were.
that.
They're not. They're doing a good job of it. God knows what it's like. I wouldn't want to try it, but
Yeah.
I
And
presume somebody
then
does.
the last big area in cultivation is like fungicides and pesticides. And again, a lot of those aren't necessarily specific to cannabis, but
Mhm.
they do, name cannabis as being one of the applications of the patent. Then there's like structures and environmental control, humidity, lighting is a big area in cultivation and whatnot. So then in processing, the biggest area is extracts. I was very interested and specifically interested in patents on converting CBD to say Delta 9 or Delta 8. And there are a lot of patents in that area. There are 2 patents on converting CBD to THCO acetate. And there's just kind of other general in processing. There's a lot in smoking. So, how to roll a joint, a lot of gizmos to help you roll joints, a lot of patents on papers to roll joints in, devices.
It's interesting because that's actually ended up being a much bigger industry than I
Yes,
think people thought it would be. So one of the wealthiest guys is that raw papers guy who's done very,
yeah,
very well
yeah,
with the simplest concepts. And I presume
yeah.
he's if we dug through his work, I'm sure we'd find a few patents in there to do with raw
Yes,
papers.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. In substances to smoke, so like formulations of the tobacco, not tobacco, the flower. You have a lot of patents owned by, unsurprisingly, tobacco companies in this area, and the heat not burn area is really big. And for people not familiar with that, it's a relatively new technology in tobacco that's akin to vaping tobacco products. So you're heating it to a temperature that's less than combustion to vaporize it rather than burn it. So the heat not burn by tobacco companies are applying it to cannabis. They're doing a lot of oral pouches, kind of in that same vein, I guess, like chew.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of patents in that area in the smoking, and then separately in vaping, there's a lot of patents in vaping, primarily in devices, and they're doing all sorts of variations on devices, which I think is really cool. Things like how to, control the temperature, how to control the dose that's coming out, some of them you can put in separate, a couple of different cartridges, so you can dial in a specific combination of a formulation that you're releasing to vape. And I think those are cool. A lot of patents on specific components of the vaping devices, say a mouthpiece, a heating device, a storage case, a charging mechanism. There's patents on the actual oil that's being used in the vaping device. And of course, all of this applies not just to cannabis, but more broadly to terpenes and essential oils. Patents on the cannabis cartridges. Um, it's about all I can think of in that area. Then we did the processes. You have a lot of containers for carrying, storing, childproofing. The storing is, making sure the cannabis isn't degrading, trying to hide it. Another, interesting patent I found is for a bicycle handlebar. That's kind of like a canister or a cylinder in the handlebar, and it's a patent for that kind of tubing where you can kind of, I guess, store your stash. So if you're on the bicycle,
That sounds very New
um,
York 1990s.
yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Another big area I was looking for, and there are a lot of patents in, is synthesizing cannabinoids from non-cannabis mechanisms, particularly growing cannabinoids in yeast or algae. And what they're doing is cannabis is relatively complex to create it. And so just creating a synthetic version is difficult because the structure is complicated. And if you take a natural organism that already has essentially a factory set up by nature to produce a substance, you can co-opt the factory, which is the infrastructure, feed it a particular input, and get out cannabinoids rather than whatever else it was producing. And there's been historically a lot of research using yeast to do various other substances, but also now cannabis. And as I said, algae, and there's E. coli and some other kind of wacky, funky ways to synthesize cannabinoids kind of unnaturally or semi-naturally. And
What
I thought,
about if we move across to industrial hemp and fibers and seeds, did you see anything, people developing any ideas there that looked sort of interesting or forward thinking?
There is a huge amount of patent activity in hemp. And for this particular analysis, that was not my focus. So I didn't specifically search on
I
hemp.
mean,
I got,
it's an endless search, I
yes,
presume.
yes, yes. There are also, I forgot to mention in the area of smoking, of course, a large number of patents on pipes and bongs and hookahs. And those are kind
All
of
the standard
interesting.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There was in the area of hemp, there was a hemp coffin, which
Well, no,
biodegrade.
I'd quite happily be putting one of those. So,
Yeah, yeah.
well, look, thank you. We're already down, from my 30 minutes, I've only got about 8 minutes left already. And we've only sort of, I would imagine, touched the surface of cannabis patents. Do you, at what point uh, are you allowed to see patents registered? So can you see them up to the present day, or is there a lag of 12 months?
No. It's current. And I
So,
believe it's to pretty much to the day or week or something. It's
okay. And
very
so are you seeing, and what's in terms of a graph going up? Is it a steady incline, or are we seeing peaks and troughs?
Oh no, I didn't do the time series this time. I had done that in the last analysis I did, I believe about 3 years ago. And it's an exponential rise.
Okay, that's very interesting. So we're going to be seeing, you know, if we're looking at patents, we're basically going to be seeing uh, a lot of products in about 5 years' time across the board, whether they be, medical, whether they be in the testing, whether they be in the growing, whether they be in the packaging. I mean, it's the industry is still bubbling away. Do patents tell you that the industry is sort of bubbling away and still in a period of great invention, I suppose, is what I'm kind of trying to drive to.
Well, I haven't compared cannabis to other industries. There is a tremendous amount of activity. There is, as I was going through, I was interested in what's currently out there that can compete. And so I deleted a lot. There were a lot of abandoned patents, but as I said, that's typical
Yeah,
because
that's
generally,
standard just across the board, isn't it?
yes. And so you see they're expired or abandoned, and that's normal in any industry. Um, you're going to continue to see patent activity. What will be very interesting to see is none of these, to my knowledge, have been litigated. And anyone can get a patent, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's valid and it will hold up under litigation. And the strongest thing out there is actually a litigated patent that's been proven to be valid. And it will be interesting to see which patents actually stand up when litigation starts happening.
Well, there's enough litigation already in the cannabis industry. The courts will just have to give up on the rest of the world and just litigate cannabis for the next 40
Yeah,
years. Ruth Fisher, thank you very much for being on the Koala podcast and explaining, just the depth and variety of patents out there. Definitely get you back in a year's time or before, or get you working on some other areas of IP as well, because it's fascinating stuff indeed.
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize the Coming, how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.